Despite all the funding opportunities that we've talked about so far, the stimulus dollars, et cetera, early childhood, as Harriet said already, has long been the handmaiden of K-12 education. Our teachers get paid much less. Many of them work without vacation days or other fringe benefits. Status is low and working conditions are often extremely hard. Yet the research on children's development has uniformly demonstrated that the first 5 to 8 years of life are crucial for success in school and in later life. So I want to hear from the panelists. We've talked about this a little bit already, but how would you explain this discrepancy at the national level? And why doesn't the field get more respect? And what can policymakers do? We have answered a bit of that. Today, we saw and heard about some really amazing programs at Educare, at the Ounce, at the Erickson, et cetera. In what ways has the work that's taking place here in Chicago with the Ounce, Educare, and Erickson informed policy decisions at the state and national levels? So there are a couple of different questions there that I've put together.
Well, let me just start with one thing that's really always struck me. People working in childcare make less money than those who take care of our dogs and cats on weekends, or who park our cars in the evenings and do a lot of other really menial chores. And yet we all love our children a lot more than our dogs and cats and our cars, at least I hope we do. And people aren't forced into those jobs, that is the childcare jobs. People choose these jobs. And not only they choose them, they stay with them. They don't stay as long as they probably would if working conditions were different. But they do stay with them, and many of us stay our whole life in this field. And the research has shown time and again, surveys of this sort, that people do this because of a deep commitment and because of a sense of identity with the job itself, that this is who I am, in other words, and I will find a way to survive this. I think that's something that is very, very special about the field. It's one of the things that draws us all to it. I also think that it has been considered, I'll take this risk of using this expression, women's work. And listen, I've been a preschool teacher too, and I feel good about that work. But it has been considered that. And so therefore, it didn't need the same status and the same support that other lines of work need. We need somehow to change this around without losing that commitment, at the same time to raise in quality and the working conditions. And I just wonder, Harriet, I know Harriet knows a lot about and has spent a lot of time in France. And I wonder, in the École Maternelle, which is the national early education there, it's a very, very different situation, is it not? Could you maybe say a word or two about that?
Yeah, I will. I want to invoke two people, though, and follow up on what you said under this roof. First of all, to answer this question, the first is, it is about women's work, and I will say no more about that. And there's a picture of a man on the outside of this wall, and that's Irving Harris, and if he were here, he would bring the infant in the room and say, there's something going on that's evolutionary, right? And I mean the evolution of man. We give birth to these helpless, beautiful objects that smell wonderful, and we want to protect them. But there's no belief in our mind, no rational belief, that those children are capable of learning. It just doesn't exist. And just because an infant can't speak doesn't mean that they're not learning and not capable of understanding the world every bit as well as any of us are, albeit without, a history of the 30, 40, 50, 60 years we have behind us. So there's that issue. The second person I would invoke is Linda Gilkerson, who is a professor here at Erickson, who has explained this to me, and I totally believe her explanation, and that is that very early childhood, from birth to 3, is about intimacy. And because it's about intimacy, we as Americans aren't willing to believe and trust that that has any importance in the future education of our children or any importance to our society. The reason we like pre-K is it's about a teacher and a classroom and a school, and that's why the guys in suits, with all due respect, are behind preschool and aren't behind what we call childcare. So I think it's intimacy that frightens us in a very big way. Last, I would say that I will talk for a second about the preschool system. The preschool system in France begins at birth, where the nurses and a medical system takes care of children and parents prenatally through the age of 2. And at 2, there's universal access to a wonderful, wonderful preschool program that I've seen and Barbara has seen as well. It was started over 100 years ago by the natalists in France who wanted to build up their population, and it was really expanded under Charles de Gaulle, that famous liberal. Remember him? Right? He wanted to do it because he understood that if you didn't have strong families, you wouldn't have, frankly, cannon fodder for the next World War. That's true.
Just very, very briefly, I think the biggest enemy that we face in terms of penetrating policy is complexity. So that in the K through 12 system, you have a system that everybody understands. There's school buildings, there's superintendents and principals, and it's basically the same everywhere you go. In early education, you have home visiting, you have childcare, you have pre-K, you have all these different things, and there are different entry points. And so it's very complex, and it's very hard for people to understand how do you enter that in a unified way. So I do think that's part of what I'm trying to do sort of on a communications level is how do we simplify this issue and make it accessible so that people can better see what the entry points are.
One of the contributions I think Erickson Institute has made, however, is to bring the notion of what a good teacher does to the forefront. I think some of you heard the mathematics group today talk about what they're doing. There's been a tendency in early childhood education to think children are rather like, little children particularly, rather like Topsy, they just grow. And one of we're finding out from research is that the education of young children is more important really than that of older children because it has a long-term effect on what they learn in the future. So teaching actively is an important component to what we have now learned about how to take care and educate young children. And I think Erickson has taken the lead in saying, look, we've got to change what teacher education looks like. And Arnie Duncan just spoke last week about teacher education and how we have to change what we're doing. We're not teaching teachers to teach the children that are in our schools. The teachers are not firmly embedded or grounded in their general education, and they're not thoroughly grounded in pedagogy. And I think we, and with our mathematics group in particular, are really pushing the envelope. How do we help children be ready to learn in school? And how do we help children who come from different backgrounds, who have different kinds of parenting backgrounds that they have experienced? How do we help all those children ready to learn as much as your and my child learned?
I would say one way that the city of Chicago and the state have really contributed to that teacher education focus is to have, within Preschool for All and other legislation, high qualifications for our teachers, which in the Type 04 certificate, et cetera, which many other states don't have that. They have a much more watered-down version of a certificate you need to have to work with young children. So,
one of the things we know is teaching children to read, teaching all children to read, even middle-class kids have trouble learning to read. Teaching children to learn to read so that they're all reading well by 3rd grade is a very complex task. It is not easy. Some kids learn easily, but there are a large group of children who have to be carefully taught. We're not teaching our teachers to teach children to read, all children to read.